The morning mist clung to the manicured lawns of Willowbrook Estates like a shroud, masking what would become the most vicious neighborhood war in the subdivision's 15-year history. Sarah Martinez had moved here 3 years ago seeking exactly this, the kind of pristine quiet that only comes with homeowners association rules and regulations. As a single mother working double shifts as a nurse, she needed somewhere her 8-year-old daughter Emma could ride her bike without worrying about traffic, somewhere the grass was always green and the mailboxes always matched. She should have known peace never comes without a price. Sarah first noticed the white SUV parked across from her driveway on a Tuesday morning in October. Behind the wheel sat Karen Whitfield, HOA President and self-appointed guardian of property values. Her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Karen's ice blue eyes tracked every movement as Sarah loaded her nursing bag into her Honda Civic. Those same eyes that had scrutinized every inch of Sarah's modest 2-story home since the day she'd moved in. "Morning, Karen," Sarah called out, forcing a smile. 3 years of HOA meetings had taught her that antagonizing Karen was like poking a sleeping rattlesnake, dangerous and utterly pointless. Karen's window rolled down with mechanical precision. "Sarah, we need to discuss your driveway situation." The words hung in the crisp autumn air like a threat. Sarah's driveway was standard concrete, identical to every other home on Maple Street. She'd even had it pressure washed last month. After Karen's pointed comments about neighborhood standards, "What situation?" Sarah asked, her nurse's instincts already sensing something was terribly wrong. "The survey markers. Your driveway extends 18 inches onto HOA common property." Karen's voice carried the satisfied tone of someone delivering a death sentence. "According to our Architectural Review Committee, you're in violation of Section 4.7 of the CC Enters." Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She'd read those covenants, conditions, and restrictions cover to cover before buying the house. There was no Section 4.7 about driveways. "Karen, I think there's been some mistake." "No mistake." Karen's smile was arctic. "The board voted last night. You have 30 days to remove the encroaching portion of your driveway or face daily fines of $250. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. $150 a day would bankrupt her within a month. "This is insane. My driveway has been here since the house was built. The city approved the construction plans. City approval doesn't override HOA regulations." Karen's window began rising. 30 days, Sarah. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. As the white SUV glided away, Sarah stood frozen in her driveway, the same driveway she'd shoveled snow from last winter. The same driveway where Emma had drawn hopscotch squares in colored chalk. The same driveway that was apparently about to cost her everything that evening. Sarah sat at her kitchen table surrounded by mortgage documents, city permits, and an original survey from when she purchased the house. Everything appeared to be in order. Her property line was clearly marked, and her driveway fell well within the boundaries. She called her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who lived in Willowbrook since it was first developed. "Oh honey," Mrs. Chen's voice crackled through the phone. "Karen's been talking about your property for months, something about a development deal." Though she clams up whenever anyone gets too curious, a chill ran down Sarah's spine. "What kind of development deal?" "I don't know, but I've seen her meeting with men in expensive suits. They always seem very interested in the properties on your side of Maple Street." Sarah hung up with a growing sense of dread. She pulled up the Willowbrook HOA website and navigated to the CC and its document. Section 4.6 dealt with landscaping requirements. Section 4.8 covered architectural modifications, but Section 4.7, it didn't exist. Her laptop screen glowed in the darkened kitchen as Sarah dove deeper into the HOA's online records. The board meeting minutes from the previous night were already posted, and there it was in black and white. Motion to enforce Section 4.7 violations on Maple Street properties. Motion carried 3-2, but when she clicked on the link to Section 4.7, she got an error message. The page didn't exist. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for her phone. This wasn't just about her driveway anymore. This was about something much bigger. Something that made Karen Whitfield willing to manufacture HOA violations out of thin air. The next morning brought a certified letter. That made her blood run cold. The envelope bore the letterhead of Whitfield and Associates, Karen's husband's law firm. Inside was a formal notice of violation and a timeline that had somehow shrunk from 30 days to 10. Attached was a crude survey map that showed Sarah's driveway extending far beyond her property line. A map that bore no resemblance to the professional survey in her mortgage documents. Sarah was still staring at the letter when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Emma's school. Ms. Martinez, this is Principal Johnson. Emma had an incident on the playground today. Another student told her that her mother was a criminal who steals other people's property. The playground incident was just the beginning. Over the next week, Sarah noticed the changes in her neighbor's behavior, the way conversations stopped. When she walked by, the pointed stairs during the school pickup line, the sudden emptiness of sidewalks when she took her evening walks. Karen's whisper campaign was working with surgical precision, but it was the anonymous note slipped under her door that truly terrified her. Criminals don't belong in Willowbrook. Leave now, or we'll make you leave. Sarah had served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic before becoming a civilian nurse. She'd faced down Taliban fighters and held dying soldiers in her arms. But the systematic character assassination happening in her own neighborhood felt more dangerous than anything she'd encountered in a war zone. On Friday night, as she tucked Emma into bed, her daughter asked the question Sarah had been dreading. "Mommy, are we going to have to move again?" Sarah smoothed her daughter's dark hair and tried to project confidence she didn't feel. "No, sweetheart, this is our home. We're going to fight for it." But even as she said the words, Sarah wondered if she was making a promise she couldn't keep. Karen Whitfield had the entire HOA board, a law firm, and the collective gossip network of Willowbrook Estates on her side. Sarah had the truth, and as she was rapidly learning in the world of homeowners associations, truth was often the weakest weapon of all. The weekend brought her first glimpse of just how weak that weapon really was. Saturday morning, she discovered a surveyor in her front yard. A thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who claimed to be conducting a routine property assessment on behalf of the HOA. When Sarah demanded to see his credentials, he produced a work order signed by Karen Whitfield herself. "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job," the surveyor said, but his eyes wouldn't meet hers. "The board has the right to verify property boundaries." Sarah watched from her living room window as the man took measurements that seemed designed to support Karen's fabricated violation. When he thought she wasn't looking, she saw him move one of the survey stakes closer to her house. She grabbed her phone and started recording, but the man finished quickly and left before she could document the tampering. That evening, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She called the one person in Willowbrook who might have answers: Jim Morrison, a former HOA board member who'd been ousted in a contentious election 2 years earlier. If anyone knew Karen's playbook, it would be Jim. They met at a coffee shop 3 towns over, away from Karen's network of allies and informants. Jim was a retired accountant with the careful manner of someone who learned to document everything. When Sarah explained her situation, his expression grew grave. "Karen's been planning this for months," he said, sliding a manila folder across the table. "After I lost my board seat, I kept monitoring their activities. This isn't about your driveway, Sarah. This is about Pinnacle Development Group." The folder contained copies of meeting minutes that had never been posted online, email exchanges between board members, and most damning of all, a preliminary development agreement between Karen Whitfield and Pinnacle Development Group for the construction of luxury condominiums on Maple Street. "The deal hinges on consolidating several properties," Jim explained. "Your lot is right in the middle of the development zone. Karen's been systematically targeting homeowners with manufactured violations, hoping to force sales or foreclosures." Sarah's hands trembled as she read the documents. "This is fraud. This is criminal conspiracy. Proving it is another matter," Jim said. "Karen's husband is one of the most powerful attorneys in the county. The whole board voted to retain his firm for all legal matters. She's got cover from every angle." As Sarah drove home through the darkened suburban streets, she realized she was no longer just fighting for her driveway. She was fighting for her home, her daughter's stability, and the integrity of an entire neighborhood. Karen Whitfield had chosen the wrong veteran to target, but first, she had to survive the cease and desist letter waiting in her mailbox when she arrived home. The cease and desist letter was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. 3 pages of dense legalese that boiled down to a simple message: shut up, or face financial destruction. Sarah read it twice by the light of her kitchen lamp, Emma sleeping peacefully upstairs, unaware that their world was crumbling around them. The letter demanded Sarah stop spreading malicious falsehoods about HOA board members and cease her harassment of Karen Whitfield. It threatened a defamation lawsuit seeking $500, zero in damages if Sarah continued to interfere with legitimate HOA governance. The signature at the bottom belonged to Robert Whitfield, Esquire, Karen's husband and the legal architect of her reign of terror. Sarah's nursing salary barely covered their mortgage and Emma's expenses. A lawsuit of that magnitude would destroy her even if she won. She set the letter aside and reached for her laptop, diving into research that would consume the next 3 days. What she discovered was a pattern of abuse that stretched back years. Using property records and court filings, Sarah traced the ownership history of homes in Willowbrook Estates over the past 2 years. 6 properties had been sold under distressed circumstances, foreclosure, estate sales, or desperate quick sales. To avoid mounting HOA fines, all 6 properties were on Maple Street or the adjacent Pine Avenue. All 6 were now owned by shell companies that trace back to Pinnacle Development Group. But Sarah's breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Emma's homework assignment about local government. While helping her daughter research city council meetings, Sarah stumbled across a planning commission agenda from 6 months earlier. Buried in the routine business was an item that made her blood run cold: preliminary review of zoning variance request for high-density residential development, Willowbrook Estates area. The request had been withdrawn without explanation, but not before generating a public comment period. Sarah found those comments archived on the city's website, and one name appeared repeatedly in opposition: Margaret Foster, a Willowbrook resident who lived on Oak Street. Sarah called Margaret that evening, and the elderly woman's voice shook with anger as she recounted her experience. "Karen threatened me directly," Margaret said. "Told me to keep my mouth shut about the development or I'd find myself facing HOA violations like you wouldn't believe." 2 weeks later, they cited me for having the wrong shade of beige on my shutters. Beige. I've had the same shutters for 8 years. As Sarah gathered more testimony from affected neighbors, she realized she needed professional help. The Legal Aid Society was overwhelmed and understaffed, but they referred her to David Chen, a young attorney who specialized in HOA disputes and had a reputation for taking on impossible cases. David's office was a cluttered cube in a strip mall, but his eyes lit up when Sarah presented her evidence. "This is incredible," he said, spreading the documents across his desk. "I've been waiting years for a case this clear-cut. Karen Whitfield has finally overplayed her hand." But David's enthusiasm dimmed as he reviewed the cease and desist letter. "The Whitfield firm has unlimited resources and a scorched earth approach. They'll try to bankrupt you with discovery requests and procedural motions before we ever get to trial. Are you prepared for that fight?" Sarah thought of Emma asking if they'd have to move again, of the playground taunts and sidewalk whispers, of the anonymous threatening note. "I've been preparing for this fight my whole life." David smiled for the first time since she'd entered his office. "Then let's go to war." Their first move was a public records request to the city for all documents related to the Willowbrook development proposal. What they received 2 weeks later was a gold mine of evidence: emails between city planners and Pinnacle Development Group, traffic studies for the proposed condominiums, and most importantly a letter from Karen Whitfield expressing full support for the development on behalf of the Willowbrook HOA. The letter was dated 3 months before Sarah received her first violation notice. "She's been planning this from the beginning," David said, highlighting the relevant passages. "The violation campaign isn't about CC and our enforcement, it's about clearing properties for development." But their legal strategy hit a roadblock when the HOA board voted to hold an emergency meeting to ratify new enforcement procedures. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening with less than 48 hours notice, violating the association's own bylaws requiring a week's advance notice for special meetings. Sarah arrived at the community center to find only Karen's inner circle. In attendance, board members who owed their positions to her influence, along with a handful of residents who'd been handpicked for their loyalty. The public comment period had been eliminated from the agenda. "This is illegal," Sarah said, standing during the board's opening remarks. "You're violating your own bylaws with inadequate notice and no public input." Karen's smile was predatory. "You're out of order, Ms. Martinez. Security will escort you out if necessary." The security guard, a man Sarah recognized as Karen's brother-in-law, took a step forward, but Sarah held her ground. "You can't conduct official business in violation of your governing documents. Any votes taken tonight will be invalid." The board has determined that emergency enforcement measures are necessary to protect property values, Karen said. Motion to ratify enhanced violation procedures. All in favor? 3 hands shot up immediately. Board member Jana Sullivan hesitated, her eyes meeting Sarah's across the room. Jana had always been reasonable in past meetings, often asking questions. That slowed Karen's steamroller approach. For a moment, Sarah thought she might have an ally. Then Janette's hand slowly rose, and Sarah's heart sank. The motion passed 4-1, with only Tom Bradley, a retired teacher who'd clashed with Karen before voting against it. The new procedures gave Karen unilateral authority to levy fines of up to $500 per day for serious violations and allowed the HOA to place liens on properties. After just 30 days of non-payment, Sarah left the meeting knowing she was now facing financial annihilation on an accelerated timeline. But she also left with something unexpected, a USB drive that Tom Bradley had slipped into her hand. As she passed his chair at home, Sarah plugged in the drive to find audio recordings from HOA board meetings going back to years, meetings where Karen's real agenda had been discussed in executive session, supposedly closed to the public. Tom's gravelly voice provided context in whispered narration. Karen's been recording everything for her own protection. She didn't know I was recording too. The recordings were devastating. Sarah listened to Karen discussing the development deal in detail, coordinating violation campaigns with surgical precision, and most damning of all, instructing board members to create fake CC and or sections to justify their enforcement actions. We'll add section 4.7 to the website after the violations are issued. Karen's voice said clearly through Sarah's laptop speakers. By the time anyone challenges it, the fines will have mounted enough to force compliance or foreclosure. Sarah called David immediately, and they worked through the night preparing their counterattack. By morning, they had a motion filed in county court seeking an emergency injunction to halt all HOA enforcement actions pending a full investigation into the board's conduct. But Karen Whitfield wasn't about to go down without a fight. The next morning brought a new cease and desist letter, this time threatening criminal charges for theft of confidential HOA information. Sarah's mailbox also contained notices from the county health department about potential septic system violations and the fire marshal about structural concerns that required immediate inspection. The systematic assault on her life was escalating, and Sarah realized Karen's network extended far beyond the HOA. She was fighting a machine designed to crush anyone who dared to challenge its authority. That evening, as Sarah helped Emma with her homework, her daughter asked a question that broke her heart. "Mommy, why does everyone hate us?" Sarah knelt down to meet Emma's eyes, seeing her own exhaustion reflected in her daughter's face. "They don't hate us, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices because they want things they shouldn't have. But we're going to make it right." Emma nodded solemnly, and Sarah saw a strength in her daughter that reminded her why this fight was worth everything she had to give. The court hearing was set for the following week, but Karen wasn't waiting for legal proceedings to play out. Sarah discovered the next phase of the assault when she tried to start her car. For her shift at the hospital, the engine was dead, and a quick inspection revealed sugar in the gas tank, a classic sabotage technique that caused thousands of dollars in engine damage. As she waited for the tow truck, Sarah watched Karen's white SUV glide past her driveway, the tinted windows hiding the driver's expression. But Sarah didn't need to see Karen's face to understand the message. This was just the beginning. The fight for Willowbrook Estates was about to become a war. The county courthouse at 9 a.m. on a gray November morning felt like a coliseum, where gladiators prepared to fight for their lives. Sarah Martinez sat at the plaintiff's table beside David Chen, watching as Robert Whitfield's legal team assembled across the aisle with the precision of a military operation. 3 attorneys in $3,000 suits flanked the man himself, Karen's husband, and the architect of the HOA's reign of terror. Judge Patricia Hernandez took the bench with the weary expression of someone who'd seen too many neighborhood disputes escalate into full-scale warfare. Her gavel echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. "This is a hearing on plaintiff's motion for emergency injunctive relief against the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association," she announced. "Mr. Chen, you may proceed." David stood, his discount suit looking shabby next to the defense team's finery, but his voice carried the conviction of absolute moral certainty. "Your Honor, this case represents one of the most egregious examples of HOA corruption and abuse ever documented in this county. The defendants have systematically manufactured violations, created fictional regulations, and conspired with developers to defraud homeowners of their property rights. He gestured to the evidence boxes stacked beside their table. We have recordings of HOA board meetings, where the defendants explicitly discuss creating fake CC in our sections. We have emails coordinating violation campaigns with Pinnacle Development Group. We have testimony from multiple residents who were threatened with retribution for opposing the development scheme. Robert Whitfield rose with the casual confidence of a predator who never met a worthy opponent. His silver hair and dignified bearing gave him the appearance of a statesman, but Sarah saw the calculation behind his eyes. Your Honor, these are desperate allegations from a homeowner who has repeatedly violated clearly established CC and now seeks to avoid accountability through character assassination. My client, the HOA board, has acted within their legal authority to maintain property standards that protect every homeowner's investment. Whitfield's opening statement was masterful, portraying Sarah as a disgruntled resident who refused to follow basic rules and had fabricated an elaborate conspiracy theory to justify her noncompliance. He painted Karen as a dedicated volunteer protecting property values against the selfish demands of one unreasonable neighbor. David's first witness was Tom Bradley, the retired teacher who provided the damning audio recordings. Tom took the oath with shaking hands, his 70-year-old frame seeming to shrink under the weight of the courtroom's attention. Mr. Bradley, David began, how long have you served on the Willowbrook HOA board? 6 years. Tom replied, his voice barely above a whisper. During that time, did you observe any irregularities in how violation enforcement was conducted? Tom's eyes found Sarah in the courtroom, and she saw him draw strength from her encouraging nod. Yes. Karen Whitfield began targeting specific properties about 2 years ago. She would manufacture violations for homes that were in perfect compliance with the actual CC enters. Did she explain her reasoning for these targeted enforcement actions? In executive session, she said we needed to encourage turnover in certain properties to facilitate a development opportunity. She specifically mentioned that forcing a few sales would benefit the entire community through increased property values. Whitfield's cross-examination was surgical. He attacked Tom's memory, his note-taking abilities, and his motivations for secretly recording private board discussions. By the time he finished, Tom looked like a confused old man with a grudge rather than a credible witness. David's second witness was Margaret Foster, the elderly woman who had opposed the development at city council meetings. Margaret's testimony about Karen's direct threats was compelling, but Whitfield dismantled her credibility by highlighting her age and suggesting she misunderstood routine HOA communications. The pattern continued through the morning. Each witness David presented was methodically destroyed by Whitfield's team, their testimony twisted into evidence of personal grievances rather than systemic corruption. By lunch recess, Sarah could see doubt creeping into Judge Hernandez's expression. We're losing, Sarah whispered to David as they huddled in the courthouse cafeteria. He stood good. David nodded grimly. The recordings are our best evidence, but without additional corroboration. Whitfield's making them look like the rantings of disgruntled board members. We need something that can't be dismissed or explained away. That something walked into the courtroom during the afternoon session in the form of Jonna Sullivan, the HOA board member who'd hesitated before voting for Karen's enforcement measures. Sarah's heart leaped when she saw Jonna enter, but her hope turned to confusion when Jonna took a seat behind the defendant's table. Whitfield called Jonna as his first witness, and Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized what was about to happen. Ms. Sullivan, Whitfield began, you serve on the Willowbrook HOA board alongside my wife, correct? Yes, for 3 years now. During your time on the board, have you observed any evidence of the conspiracy alleged by the plaintiff? Jonna's voice was steady and clear as she answered, no. Mrs. Whitfield has always acted in the best interest of our community. Her enforcement actions are based on legitimate violations of our governing documents. The betrayal hit Sarah like a physical blow. Jonna had been present for every meeting Tom had recorded, had heard every discussion about manufactured violations and development schemes. Now she sat in the witness chair, methodically destroying Sarah's case with calm, credible testimony. Ms. Sullivan, Whitfield continued, the plaintiff has suggested that HOA board members conspired to create fictional violations. In your experience, are all violation notices based on actual CC and our provisions? Absolutely. Every violation I've seen has been thoroughly researched and documented. Mrs. Martinez's driveway encroachment, for example, was confirmed by professional survey. David's cross-examination was gentle but persistent. Ms. Sullivan, do you recall a board meeting where the creation of Section 4.7 of the CC&Rs was discussed? Jeanette's hesitation was barely perceptible. I don't recall that specific discussion. Would you be surprised to learn that Section 4.7 doesn't appear in the recorded CC&Rs filed with the county? I would assume any discrepancies are clerical errors that will be corrected. Sarah watched in horror as Jeanette deflected every question with rehearsed precision. The woman who'd shown doubt during the emergency board meeting was now Karen's most effective weapon. As Jeanette stepped down from the witness stand, she made brief eye contact with Sarah. In that moment, Sarah saw something that chilled her not malice or greed, but fear. Jeanette Sullivan wasn't betraying her by choice. She was being coerced. The revelation came too late to help with Jeanette's testimony, but it gave Sarah hope that the truth might still emerge. If Karen was threatening board members to secure their loyalty, there might be other victims willing to come forward. Judge Hernandez called for a brief recess before closing arguments, and Sarah noticed unusual activity near the courthouse entrance. Sheriff's deputies were positioning themselves around the building, and she saw federal agents in windbreakers conferring with the bailiff. David returned from the hallway, with confusion written across his face. Something's happening. The FBI just asked court security to prevent anyone from leaving the building. Before Sarah could respond, the courtroom doors burst open and Special Agent Maria Santos strode in, flanked by two other federal agents. Behind them walked Jim Morrison, the former HOA board member who first shown Sarah the development documents. Your Honor, Agent Santos announced, we need to interrupt these proceedings. We have an arrest warrant for Robert Whitfield on charges of mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit racketeering. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Robert Whitfield shot to his feet, his face pale with shock. This is outrageous. I demand to know what charges, Mr. Whitfield, Agent Santos said calmly. You're under arrest for participating in a criminal conspiracy to defraud homeowners through fraudulent HOA violations and development schemes. As federal agents moved to handcuff the man who'd seemed untouchable just moments before, Sarah saw Karen Whitfield in the gallery, her perfectly composed mask finally cracking. The Ice Queen of Willowbrook Estates was watching her kingdom crumble in real time. Judge Hernandez gavelled for order, but Sarah could barely hear over the pounding of her own heart. The courtroom showdown had just become something much bigger than a neighborhood dispute. It had become a federal case. The arrest of Robert Whitfield sent shockwaves through the courtroom, but the real bombshell was still to come. As federal agents led the disgraced attorney away in handcuffs, Special Agent Santos approached the bench with a thick manila folder that would unravel the most sophisticated HOA fraud scheme in county history. Your Honor, Agent Santos said, our investigation into the Whitfield operation began 6 months ago, following a complaint from the state attorney general's office. What we discovered was a criminal enterprise that spans multiple HOA communities and involves over $15 million in fraudulent property transfers. Judge Hernandez ordered the courtroom cleared except for essential parties, but she allowed Sarah to remain as the primary victim, whose case had triggered the federal investigation. As Sarah watched from the gallery, Agent Santos laid out evidence that made her own ordeal seem like just the tip of an iceberg. The Whitfield operation was stunningly simple in its design. Robert Whitfield would identify HOA communities ripe for development, then work with his wife Karen to manufacture violations against properties in strategic locations. The mounting fines and legal fees would force homeowners into distressed sales, often at prices far below market value. Those properties would then be purchased by shell companies controlled by Pinnacle Development Group, with the Whitfields receiving substantial kickbacks for each successful acquisition. The beauty of the scheme, Agent Santos explained, was that it appeared completely legal. HOA boards have broad enforcement authority, and the Whitfields were careful to create paper trails that supported their actions. But when you examine the pattern across multiple communities, the criminal intent becomes clear. David leaned over to whisper in Sarah's ear. Jim Morrison wasn't just a concerned former board member. He's been working with the FBI for months, gathering evidence from inside the whole structure. The revelation explained how Jim had obtained such detailed documentation of Karen's activities. His ouster from the board hadn't been a political loss, it had been a strategic repositioning that allowed him to investigate without raising suspicion. But Agent Santos wasn't finished. Her next revelation sent the remaining courtroom observers into stunned silence. Your Honor, We also uncovered evidence of witness intimidation, bribery, and extortion. Several HOA board members were threatened with financial ruin if they didn't support Mrs. Whitfield's enforcement actions. Others were offered direct financial incentives for their cooperation. Sarah's eyes immediately went to Jana Sullivan, who sat rigid in the gallery with tears streaming down her face. The betrayal she'd felt during Janet's testimony transformed into sympathy as she realized the impossible position Karen had created for the woman. Judge Hernandez reviewed the federal evidence for nearly an hour, while the courtroom waited in tense silence. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who had witnessed the systematic corruption of institutions designed to protect citizens. The evidence presented by federal investigators completely undermines the defendant's case. In this proceeding, she said, more importantly, it reveals a pattern of criminal fraud that has victimized dozens of homeowners across multiple communities. She turned to address Sarah directly. Ms. Martinez, your courage in challenging this corruption has exposed a criminal enterprise that might have continued indefinitely. The court grants your motion for emergency injunctive relief and orders the immediate suspension of all HOA enforcement actions, pending a complete restructuring of the Willowbrook board. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, the court orders a forensic audit of all HOA financial records and property transfers conducted in the past 3 years. Any homeowners who were forced to sell their properties under questionable circumstances will have the right to seek restitution. As the formal proceedings concluded, Agent Santos approached Sarah with documents that would prove to be the final twist in her ordeal. The paperwork revealed something that even the FBI investigation had initially missed: a crucial detail buried in the original property records. That changed everything, Ms. Martinez, Agent Santos said. Our forensic accountants discovered something interesting about your property. The original deed contains a restrictive covenant that was never properly recorded with the county. According to that covenant, your lot was designated as a buffer zone between the residential development and the adjacent wetlands. As a result, it can never be developed for high-density housing. Sarah stared at the documents in confusion. What does that mean? It means your property was never a legitimate target for Karen Whitfield's scheme. Agent Santos explained. The development project couldn't proceed with your lot in the middle of the planned construction zone. She knew this from the beginning, but she targeted you anyway, possibly out of spite or as a way to maintain the appearance of random enforcement. David whistled softly. She went after you knowing she couldn't win, which means this was personal from the start. The revelation added a final layer of vindication to Sarah's victory, but it also highlighted the sheer malice behind Karen's actions. She hadn't just been a casualty of a development scheme, she'd been the victim of a personal vendetta, disguised as community enforcement. As Sarah left the courthouse that evening, she found a small crowd of Willowbrook residents waiting for her. Margaret Foster was there, along with Tom Bradley and even Jana Sullivan, who approached with obvious embarrassment. Sarah, Jana said, her voice shaking, I'm so sorry for what I said in there. Karen threatened to foreclose on my mother's house if I didn't support her. Mom's in memory care, and the house is all she has left. Sarah took Jeanette's hands in hers. You don't need to apologize. We were all victims of the same system. The crowd gathered around them represented just a fraction of the homeowners who'd been targeted by the Whitfield scheme, but their presence filled Sarah with hope. For the first time in months, the neighborhood felt like a community again rather than a battlefield. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the same driveway that had started her war with Karen Whitfield, watching Emma ride her bicycle in lazy circles, while the setting sun painted the suburban street in shades of gold. The federal investigation had led to criminal convictions for both Robert and Karen Whitfield, along with 3 other HOA board members who participated in the conspiracy. The Pinnacle Development Group had agreed to a $50 million settlement with affected homeowners, and the planned high-density development had been permanently canceled. The Willowbrook HOA had been completely restructured, with new bylaws requiring transparency in all enforcement actions and independent oversight of board decisions. Tom Bradley had been elected as the new president, bringing an era of reasonable governance that focused on genuine community improvement rather than manufactured conflicts. But the most satisfying twist of all had come 3 weeks earlier, when Sarah received a certified letter from the county assessor's office. Due to the restrictive covenant discovered during the federal investigation, her property had been reclassified as environmental buffer land, making it eligible for significant tax reductions and ensuring its permanent protection from development. The driveway that Karen Whitfield had tried to destroy was now legally guaranteed to remain exactly where it was for generations to come. As Emma pedaled past, calling out, "Look, Mom, no hands," Sarah reflected on the lessons learned during her battle with the home machine. She discovered that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who use the appearance of legitimacy to mask their criminal intent. She learned that fighting for what's right often requires risking everything you hold dear. But most importantly, she learned that ordinary people have more power than they realize when they refuse to be intimidated by those who abuse their authority. The white SUV was gone from across the street, replaced by the cheerful chaos of a young family moving in. The new neighbors had already introduced themselves, expressing relief that they'd avoided the HOA troubles they'd heard about from friends. Sarah had smiled and told them that Willowbrook was a different place now, a place where neighbors looked out for each other instead of looking for reasons to tear each other down. As the streetlights began to flicker on and Emma finally came inside for dinner, Sarah took one last look at her driveway, the battlefield where she'd made her stand against corruption and won. It was just 18 inches of concrete that had never belonged to the HOA in the first place, but it had become the foundation for something much more important: the principle that in America, ordinary citizens still have the power to fight back against those who would abuse them.